Welcome to today's deep dive. If you've ever found yourself stuck in an evening routine that you just desperately want to change, you are absolutely in the right place today.
Yeah, definitely.
Because our mission today is to really unpack the hidden, almost invisible mechanics of our nighttime habits. We're specifically looking at the nightly drinking loop and, why trying to break that loop using just brute force willpower is, well, a recipe for immense frustration.
Right, because it just doesn't work. And to sort of map out this territory, we are looking at the writings and the research of Susan Gast. So she's the creator of Live Better Sober. And what's great is she brings a perspective that is incredibly well researched, but also deeply personal.
Yeah, it's not just theory.
Exactly. She has actually been alcohol-free for over 25 years herself. So her work really focuses on these practical, real-life approaches to habit change, particularly for people who are, maybe exploring alternatives to traditional routes like AA.
I really appreciate how grounded these sources are, to be honest. We aren't just reading some dense medical textbook today.
No, not at all.
We're looking at this completely fascinating breakdown of how human behavior and automatic routines actually function under the hood. So to kick things off, I want you to think about that feeling when you were driving home from a long day at work.
Oh, yeah, the commute.
Right. You pull into your driveway, you put the car in park, and you suddenly have this cold realization that you do not actually remember driving the last 3 miles.
It's kind of scary, honestly. Psychologists actually call that highway hypnosis.
Highway hypnosis.
Yeah. Your brain basically just hands the steering wheel over to this deeply ingrained autopilot system.
And it is incredibly seamless, highly efficient, and like you said, honestly a little terrifying if you linger on the reality of it. I mean, you are entirely checking out of a complex, potentially dangerous task, moving at 60 miles an hour and relying completely on a pre-programmed behavioral loop just to get you home alive.
Right, because the human brain is just a master optimizer. It takes any heavily repeated sequence of actions and just pushes it down into the subconscious.
Just to save energy.
Exactly, to free up mental bandwidth.
So now imagine that same autopilot takes over the exact second you walk through your front door. Only it isn't steering a sedan down the interstate. It is steering your entire evening.
Yeah.
And we really need to start by completely dismantling the biggest misconception that holds people back from changing these kinds of habits. Because the prevailing societal idea is that if you can't stop doing something like pouring a glass of wine at 6 o'clock every night, you're just, a weak-willed person.
Right, and that is a massive, pervasive myth, and the source material just systematically tears it apart, because when you look at the demographics of the typical nightly habit drinker, you rarely find a lack of discipline.
No, not at all.
More often than not, you're looking at highly responsible, caring, hardworking, and exceptionally functional individuals.
Yeah, I mean, they're managing entire departments at work, right? They're raising kids, juggling mortgages, keeping complex lives afloat.
Yeah.
It is wild because these are the exact people putting out fires all day long. If they were inherently weak-willed, their entire daytime reality would just collapse.
Which forces us to look for the actual culprit, right? Because if someone has the discipline to run a company or manage a bustling household from sunrise to sunset, the issue is clearly not a character flaw.
No, it can't be.
The core issue is actually how the brain handles deeply repeated cues. Nightly drinking is one of the absolute easiest habits for the human brain to automate because it gets attached to these incredibly powerful environmental and emotional triggers.
Like what kinds of triggers?
Well, you finish work. You need to transition into relaxation, you crave comfort or a reward for just surviving a chaotic day, or perhaps you just desperately need an emotional shutdown.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy, because I think this makes it so much clearer. Think about the smartphone in your pocket. You have all these background apps running constantly, location services, push notifications, Bluetooth scanning.
Right, draining the battery.
Exactly. You never actively open them. They just hum along in the background to keep the phone functioning while preserving battery for the screen you're actually looking at. So if these people are so highly functional and hardworking in their day jobs, why does this specific background app of pouring a drink take over completely the second they clock out?
What's fascinating here is how the brain's own brilliant design for neurological efficiency actually actively works against high achievers in the evening.
Oh, wow. How so?
Well, throughout the day, a highly functional person is utilizing their prefrontal cortex heavily.
That's the part right behind the forehead.
Right, yeah, that's the sophisticated, logical, decision-making center of the brain. And every time you answer an email, negotiate a conflict, or even just decide what to feed your kids, you're burning fuel in that prefrontal cortex.
It's exhausting.
It really is. By the time 6 p.m. rolls around, that area is completely depleted. We call this decision fatigue.
So the battery is in the red, and the phone just goes into low power mode.
Yeah.
It essentially refuses to process any more complex decisions.
It absolutely does. I mean, the brain is obsessed with conserving energy. So when it recognizes a familiar daily sequence of events like walking through the door, dropping your keys in the bowl, changing out of your work clothes, it immediately launches the automated routine that is historically associated with that sequence.
It just takes over.
Exactly. It bypasses the tired prefrontal cortex entirely and hands the keys over to a much older, primitive part of the brain called the basal ganglia. And for the nightly drinker, the basal ganglia just launches the alcohol routine. It's a matter of efficiency. It's not a lack of willpower.
That distinction between the prefrontal cortex and the basal ganglia really shifts the perspective because, I mean, if I am sitting on the couch eating a whole bag of junk food at 8 p.m.,
Yeah.
I usually beat myself up for having no self-control.
Oh, we all do that.
But my prefrontal cortex, the part of me that actually cares about my cholesterol, is essentially offline at that point. The primitive brain has taken over because the bag of chips is just a familiar, comforting routine.
Right. The brain is literally just running the script you wrote for it over the past 5 years. And Susan Gass notes that the urge to drink often hits before the conscious decision is even formulated.
Wow.
Yeah, the script runs before you even realize you are reading the lines.
Let's dig into the actual mechanics of that trigger then. Because if the behavior is a background app running on autopilot in the basal ganglia, we really need to understand the code that launches it.
Right, the specific cues.
The source material emphasizes that the brain absolutely loves predictable rewards. It quickly remembers and files away anything that brings relief or escape.
And alcohol is a highly effective, incredibly fast-acting chemical tool for that specific job. I mean, it artificially induces relaxation, it numbs the sharp edges of daily stress, and it artificially depresses the central nervous system to reduce anxiety.
It works fast.
It does. It provides a very tangible feeling of reward. It's basically a chemical shortcut to mentally clocking out.
So over time, through sheer unyielding repetition, your brain starts doing math. It creates this rock-solid equation. Evening equals relief is coming, and the vehicle delivering that relief is the drink in the glass.
Exactly. And that equation forms a classic neurological habit loop. You have a trigger, a routine, and a reward.
Walk us through that.
So the trigger is the environmental cue work ends, stress peaks, the sun goes down. The routine is the automatic behavioral response. Your thoughts turn to the kitchen counter, you open the bottle. And the reward is that temporary artificial drop in anxiety. And every single time that loop completes, the neural pathway gets thicker and faster.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, and I kind of have to push back on this terminology a bit. We keep calling this a reward.
Okay, yeah.
Let's look at the actual reality for the nightly habit drinker. They take the drink at 6 p.m., but then they wake up at 3 a.m. It's the classic alcohol-induced sleep disruption, right?
Right, absolutely. The 3 a.m. wake up.
Their heart is racing, their mouth is dry, you're staring at the ceiling enveloped in this suffocating chemical anxiety, just doing the mental map of how many hours until their alarm goes off.
It's a terrible feeling.
And then they wake up at 7 a.m. feeling exhausted, sluggish, and deeply disappointed in themselves. So how on earth is the brain still classifying this experience as a reward? Isn't the human brain smart enough to see the terrible return on investment?
It's a brilliant question, and it really highlights why habitual behaviors baffle people who aren't stuck in them. But you have to remember the division of labor in the brain we just talked about.
The basal ganglia versus the prefrontal cortex.
Exactly. The basal ganglia, that primitive part running the loop, does not possess a concept of tomorrow.
Yeah, really, none at all.
None. It does not care about your 7 a.m. alarm. It has no capacity to understand your long-term health goals or your moral aspirations. It operates strictly on the metric of immediate short-term relief.
So it is completely blind to the future.
Totally blind. You have to remember, the human brain evolved in an environment where immediate survival was the only thing that mattered. It prioritizes instant, temporary relief over delayed consequences, every single time.
Wow.
So when that first sip hits the bloodstream at 6 p.m., the relief is instantaneous. The dopamine spikes, the acute stress drops, and that immediate sensory feedback tells the basal ganglia, yes, this is an excellent strategy, mission accomplished.
While the disastrous consequences, the 3 a.m. panic, the hangover, the shame, all happen hours later.
Exactly. And those consequences are processed by a completely different part of the brain. So by the time you feel that 3 a.m. anxiety, the primitive brain has long since logged the 6 p.m. drink as a massive, unequivocal success. It has already reinforced the habit loop for the next evening.
That is a staggering realization. The brain logs the immediate relief as a win, totally ignoring the disaster unfolding 8 hours later.
Right.
Which explains the most common and perhaps most tragic trap people fall into when they try to quit. Because we assume the solution to a bad habit is just brute force.
Yeah, people naturally fall back on the idea of just trying harder. They wake up with that 7 a.m. disappointment and think, I just need to summon more self-control today. I should be able to just stop.
Right.
They rely entirely on motivation to fix what is essentially a structural neurological problem.
Susan Gass's writings are incredibly vivid on this point. I mean, she describes living this exact, highly predictable cycle for 20 years. She would wake up feeling terrible, stare at the ceiling, and swear, tonight is going to be different. She would use every ounce of motivation she had to white-knuckle through the day. And maybe it would work for a day or two. But eventually, the motivation fades, the stress returns, the prefrontal cortex gets fatigued, and boom, the autopilot takes over.
And she falls back into the old habit.
Exactly. The shame compounds, and the whole cycle just resets.
20 years of waking up wondering why your own brain betrayed you again. That is the hidden reality for millions of people. And the reason it happens is that motivation is an emotion. It's not a structural system.
That makes so much sense.
Right. You wouldn't rely on being in a good mood to pay your mortgage. You set up an automatic bank transfer. Habits do not respond to shame, and they do not respond to internal emotional pressure. They only respond to structural replacement.
It feels like trying to stop a massive speeding freight train by just standing on the tracks and pushing against it with your bare hands.
That's a great way to picture it.
You are throwing pure, unadulterated willpower against tons of automated neurological momentum. And, I mean, if you are incredibly strong, you might hold the train off for a day, maybe two, but eventually your arms give out, the fatigue sets in, and you just get run over by the routine.
Yeah, you get flattened.
You can't just stand there pushing. You have to figure out how to switch the tracks entirely.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the train track analogy perfectly illustrates why taking away the alcohol without replacing it is doomed to fail.
Because the train is still moving.
Exactly. When you just use willpower, you're attempting to rip a deeply entrenched routine out of your life without offering the basal ganglia any substitute for the relief it has been trained to expect at 6 p.m.
You are creating a massive vacuum. You take away the drink, but the trigger, the underlying stress of the day is still sitting right there.
The train is still running on the exact same fuel, and it is still aiming for the exact same destination of evening relief. If you just remove the old track, the train derails. To switch the tracks safely, you have to build a new one. You have to offer the brain a new rack to process the end of the day.
This might be the most profound insight in all of these sources, really. The concept of the empty space.
Yes, the empty space is huge.
Because we tend to think the physical withdrawal is the hardest part of breaking a habit. But for the standard nightly habit drinker, the sources emphasize that the absolute hardest part is the gaping emotional and temporal void left behind in the evening.
The empty space is essentially where willpower goes to die. People realize very quickly that they don't just miss the chemical effect of the alcohol. They miss the deliberate pause in their day.
The ritual of it.
Exactly. They miss the tactile comfort of the glass. They miss the physical, definitive signal that the demands of the workday are officially over. For years, the clink of ice or the pop of a cork was basically the period at the end of the sentence of their responsibilities.
So if you just implement a "I will not drink tonight" strategy, you leave the brain completely stranded. It's 6 p.m., the stress is peaking, the environmental cues are all firing, but the usual routine is blocked by your willpower.
And the primitive brain starts panicking.
Right, it's saying, where's the relief? How do I know the day is over? What am I supposed to do with all this lingering cortisol?
And without a substitute, you end up just white-knuckling your way through the evening, pacing the living room, feeling intensely deprived and irritable.
Just miserable.
Completely miserable, which is why Susan Gass developed her specific framework, 66 days to break the nightly drinking habit. The entire premise is built on the understanding that it takes significant time, usually over 2 months, not just that mythic 21 days people talk about, to actually physically reshape these deep neural pathways.
So what does this all mean in practical terms? How do you actually fill that empty space and interrupt the routine without just feeling like you are punishing yourself?
Well, the goal, especially in those early days, is not to instantly transform into an enlightened, perfectly zen human being.
Good, because that sounds impossible.
It is. The goal is simply to interrupt the old automated pattern long enough for your brain to experience and log something different. You have to shift your focus from, I can't do this, to a very proactive question. What exactly do I do tonight instead?
You have to engineer a new system. Because as we established, willpower fades the second you get tired. But a system holds you up regardless of how you feel.
A structured system provides immediate awareness. It forces an active interruption of the old routines. It offers daily accountability to keep you focused, and it slowly builds momentum. If your normal routine is to walk in the door and immediately head to the kitchen to pour a glass of wine, you have to actively change the environment to break that cue.
Give me some concrete examples from the source material. What does building a new track actually look like on a random Tuesday?
It looks like creating a new physical boundary between the workday and the evening. So instead of going to the kitchen, you walk through the door and immediately go take a hot shower.
Oh, interesting.
Right. The temperature change and the sensory experience offer the brain a different kind of relief, and it signals a transition. Or if you usually drink on the couch at 7 p.m., you completely abandon the couch at that hour.
Just don't even sit there.
Exactly. You go for a walk, you listen to a podcast, you go to a different room and engage your hands in a hobby.
You are giving the basal ganglia a different stimulus to chew on. Even if you normally drink while cooking dinner, you change the parameters. You change what you're drinking. Maybe you put a sparkling water in a nice glass. You change the lighting. You play completely different music. Or maybe you even prep the meal earlier in the day to avoid that witching hour entirely.
You're actively rewiring the evening equals alcohol association by forcing the brain to associate the evening with a new, healthier stimulus. You're basically laying down the steel for the new train track, one evening at a time.
But laying new tracks takes time, right? And the transition is rarely a smooth, linear process. People are inevitably going to slip up. And when they do, the immediate reaction is often a total mental collapse. They think they're uniquely broken.
Yeah, the shame spiral.
We really need to look at how the source material reframes this struggle and the absolute necessity of persistent effort.
Because the narrative you construct around failure dictates whether you will ultimately succeed. Struggling to quit a deeply ingrained habit, having moments where the old autopilot takes over, that does not mean you are a weak person. It simply proves the neurological reality. The behavior has been massively reinforced through heavy daily repetition over years, maybe decades.
There is an incredibly encouraging truth tucked into these articles about the cognitive dissonance people feel. The sheer fact that you are annoyed with yourself, the fact that you are wrestling with this actually matters immensely.
It is the most critical indicator of future success.
Really?
Absolutely. Think about it. People who are completely comfortable with their destructive habits, people who truly do not care, rarely question their own behavior. They aren't lying awake at 3 a.m. wishing they were different. They aren't listening to deep dives about the neurobiology of habit formation.
So that internal tension between what you're currently doing and what you desperately want to be doing is actually a massive positive signal. If you are frustrated with the pattern, if you are actively searching out frameworks and answers, it means a very real, very powerful part of your brain already wants a different life more than it wants another drink tonight. The frustration itself is undeniable proof of your desire to change.
This raises an important question, though, about our internal dialogue during a relapse. Because the articles highlight a fascinating phenomenon. People attempting to change this habit often stumble at highly predictable intervals, usually frequently around day 7 or day 10.
Why that?
Well, when that happens, the standard internal response is, I am a failure. I knew I couldn't do this. But we have to look deeper.
Right, because if we look at it through the lens of everything we've just discussed, day 7 isn't some magical marker of personal failure. Day 7 is usually a Friday.
Exactly.
It is the end of a long, exhausting week. Your prefrontal cortex is completely drained from 5 days of decision fatigue, plus the added cognitive load of consciously fighting a habit all week long.
Precisely. The new, fragile train track you've been building for a week just wasn't structurally sound enough yet to hold the massive weight of Friday evening stress. So the brain panicked. It reverted to the old reinforced track because it knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that that track would deliver immediate relief.
So a relapse doesn't mean the new system is a failure. It just means the new pattern needed more reinforcement.
Oh.
It completely changes the framing from a moral failing to an engineering problem.
You start viewing the slip-up as data rather than a character judgment. You look at day 7 and say, okay, that was really difficult because it was a Friday and my baseline stress was much higher. Next week, I need to engineer a much stronger alternative plan for Friday evening.
You remove the shame.
Exactly, which allows you to keep iterating on your system instead of just giving up.
So let's pull all these threads together. The nightly drinking habit, or truly any deeply ingrained mindless evening routine, is not a sign of a weak will. It is a highly efficient, fully automated brain loop. Your primitive brain is basically running a background app because your decision-making centers are fatigued and your nervous system is demanding predictable relief from the day's stress.
And breaking that loop requires abandoning the shame-filled, utterly ineffective trap of just trying harder. You cannot rely on the fleeting emotion of motivation.
You have to stop standing on the tracks trying to push the train backward. Instead, you have to acknowledge the empty space left behind when you remove the habit and intentionally build a structured daily system to fill that void. You have to answer the daily question, what do I do tonight instead?
Right. And for anyone listening, whether you are trying to change a drinking habit, a late-night doom-scrolling compulsion, or, any other automatic routine that leaves you feeling drained the next morning, the underlying mechanics are the exact same. Recognizing your triggers without judgment and acknowledging the cognitive dissonance are the critical first steps in building a new track.
We have spent a lot of time today dissecting the empty space left behind when you remove a prominent evening habit. We've talked about the hidden background apps running on autopilot, but I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. Look closely at your life right now, tonight. What unaddressed stresses or quiet, empty spaces in your evening are you currently using automatic, mindless routines to fill? And more importantly, what could you intentionally build in their place before you pull into the driveway and let the highway hypnosis take over?